I want you to think back what Vancouver real estate looked like just a few years ago. Developers were launching luxury towers and selling out entire buildings, sometimes in a single weekend. People were lining up left, right, and center, even into Wasson for a specific condo building. Units were going for over $2,000 per square foot. People lining up, putting down deposits, sight unseen, on condos that haven't even broken ground yet. And every single year, the market kept climbing. Land values kept climbing. Developers' profits kept climbing. Over the last 30 years in real estate, we've seen nothing but the real estate market increase over time. And this felt like, to a lot of people, like it was never, ever going to stop. And the developers, they were absolute kings of the city. Some of the most profitable businesses in British Columbia weren't even tech companies or resource companies. They were real estate developers right here in Vancouver. Now, I want you to think about what's happening in the market as we speak today, March 2026. Luxury condos in the city are selling at $1 million discounts from their peak prices. Completed towers are sitting with dozens of unsold units. People are failing to complete on them. People are not in these at all anymore. Presale buyers aren't completing on the condos because they're worth so much less than what they actually paid for them. And the developers themselves, behind closed doors in private text messages, are telling a very different story than the one that they put in press releases. So here's the thing. We know this because those private conversations just became public record. In December of 2025, a lawsuit was filed between one of Vancouver's largest developers and their former vice president. And buried inside of these court filings are text message exchanges that were never, ever meant to see the light of day. Today, I'm gonna walk you through all of it. The lawsuit, the text messages, the specific projects, the sales data, the land deal questions, all of it. Because I think what's happening right now in Vancouver's luxury real estate market is one of the most important stories that this city has seen in years. And most people have absolutely no idea of how deep it goes. So let's get into it. Before we get into the lawsuit and text messages, I want to take a minute and explain how we got to this point, because I think context is always the most important piece of the puzzle. For the better part of a decade, Vancouver's real estate market operated on a specific model. Developers would acquire land, often at higher prices, launch a pre-sale campaign, sell units years before completion, and use that pre-sale revenue to finance construction. The whole system worked for years because prices kept going up. Every year, the market was higher than the year before. So even if a project ran over budget, which they usually do, even if there was delays, the developer could always count on selling the remaining units at a higher price than they originally projected. And buyers played along, because why wouldn't you? If you always expected prices to go up, you wanted to get into the market. If you bought a pre-sale unit for $1.5 million and by the time it completed it was worth $2 million, that's not a home, that's an investment. And this feedback loop ran for years, if not decades. And it created an entire ecosystem. Developers, lenders, realtors, investors, all built around the assumption that prices would keep going up. And then interest rates went up 7 times in a row. Demand cooled. Pre-sale assignments became harder to flip, if you were even allowed to flip them. And suddenly, the entire model started showing its cracks. Projects that broke ground in 2019, 2020, 2021, when the market was near its peak, are now completing in a completely different environment. The construction costs are the same or higher. The financing costs, they're higher too. But the prices that buyers are willing to pay, it's so much lower. And that gap between what it costs to build and what you can actually sell for is where developers are getting squeezed right now. This is the backdrop for everything I'm about to show you, so keep it in mind. Let's talk about the lawsuit. In December of 2025, Westbank's former vice president filed a claim alleging she's owed $1.2 million in unpaid bonuses. Now, Westbank is not a small developer. They're one of the biggest, most recognized name in all of Vancouver real estate. They built Vancouver House, they built the Butterfly. They've been behind some of the most talked about architectural projects the city has ever seen. So what's their response to the lawsuit? They offered $200,000, 1/6 of what the plaintiff was asking for. Their argument is that her bonus was performance-based, tied to profitability and success of those projects. And right now, they're claiming their projects are not performing, which is very easy to see. Now, I want to be fair here. The $1.2 million versus $200,000 dispute, that's for the courts to decide. Bonus structures are super complicated in any industry, and without seeing the full contract, I'm not going to pretend to know who's right here or who's wrong. If there's a clear written agreement, she'll likely get it. If it's more ambiguous, it becomes a much murkier legal question. Either way, that's between them. But thanks to this lawsuit, here's what's not just between them anymore. When this case went to court, text message exchanges were submitted as evidence, and those messages were written privately. They were never intended to be public. are now part of the public court record. And what they describe is a company dealing with serious financial pressure across multiple major projects. So I'm going to go through each one. The first project mentioned in the text message is Senakw. This massive mixed-use development near the Burrard Bridge built in a 50-50 partnership between Westbank and the Squamish Nation. Now, Senakw is a fascinating project for a lot of reasons. It's on Squamish Nation land, which means it's not subject to city zoning in the same way that other developments are. When it was announced, it was positioned as this landmark progressive development, thousands of rental units, and a partnership with Indigenous nations, a project that was going to reshape part of Vancouver. Westbank was originally supposed to complete on this project. Instead, according to the next text message, they decided to sell their 50% stake to the Ontario Pension Trust. And this is where it gets very telling. According to the alleged text messages, last-minute negotiations resulted in Westbank accepting an offer that was 30% lower than what had been agreed upon, which itself was already 50% lower than what they agreed the year before. Let me say that again, because I want to make sure that lands. They agreed on a price. Then they agreed on a new price, half of the original. And at the last minute, they accepted another 30% cut on top of that. That shows signs of a company that needed liquidity. That is a company that was willing to take a very significant haircut on a very significant asset because the alternative was even worse. And if you're wondering what the alternative might be, I think the next few projects give you a pretty clear answer on that. The second project mentioned is Oakridge Park, and according to the text messages, it is way behind schedule. Now, this is a big one. Oakridge Park has been one of the most ambitious mixed-use developments in Vancouver's history. You've probably seen it when you're driving in the Vancouver area. We're talking about a complete reimagining of Oakridge area. Retail, office, thousands of residential units, a massive new park. It broke ground in 2019. That is 7 years ago, and it's still not done. Now, construction delays happen. They happen on large projects everywhere, all the time. There's permit issues, supply chain problems, labor shortages. There are hundreds of reasons a project like this can fall behind. And in a normal market, a delay isn't necessarily catastrophic for a developer. In fact, in the market we had from 2019 to 2022, delays were almost fine or good because prices kept going up. So the units you hadn't sold yet were worth more by the time that you got around to selling them. But we aren't in that market anymore. Things have completely shifted. So here's what that delay means in this environment that we're seeing right now. Every month the project isn't done is another month of financing costs, construction costs, carrying costs, without the revenue from completions to offset them. And when a project finally does complete, you're selling into a market where buyers have far more options, way more negotiating power. And when the project does finally complete, you're selling in a completely different market where buyers have so many options, far more negotiating power, and far less urgency than they did 3 or 4 years ago. And then there's the buyer side of this equation. Think about the people who bought pre-sale units at Oakridge Park back in 2019, 2020, or 2021. They signed contracts at prices that reflected the market at that time, which was near peak. They've been waiting 5-6 years for their units to be ready. And now, potentially they're going to complete on condos that are worth less than what they paid. We've already seen this play out in other parts of Metro Vancouver. Surrey Central, Brentwood, Metrotown, Coquitlam, Tawasin. In each of those areas, pre-sale buyers who purchase at or near the peak have completed on units that are underwater or just barely breaking even after accounting for all the transaction costs. If Oakridge follows the same pattern, the fallout is going to be significant, both for the buyers and the developer. Now I want to spend some time on the next two projects because I think they're the most revealing and because I have actual sales data to show you, not just alleged text messages. Let's start with the Butterfly. If you live in Vancouver, you know this building. It's one of the most distinctive towers on the skyline. That twisting, folded design they either love or think looks completely bizarre. It was marketed as the ultimate statement in ultra luxury urban living. Units were priced accordingly. Some of the highest price per square foot ever asked in all of Vancouver. According to some messages, Butterfly is well over budget and closings are described as slow and uncertain. I've talked about this building before and a lot more information is coming out. Since the building completed in 2024, not a single unit has resold on the multiple listing service. 0 resales in an entire completed luxury tower. Not one. Now you might think, okay, people who have bought luxury units aren't in a rush to sell. Maybe they're happy living there. That would be a reasonable explanation if people weren't actively trying to sell. But they are. There are sellers in that building who are willing to take losses of $1 million or more on their units, and they still can't find a buyer. The listings sit, the price drops, and still nothing happens. So I went back and checked on some of the data from another video I did. Since July, not a single resale has gone through MLS. I've been covering Vancouver real estate for a long time. I've been doing this for 15 years. This is year 16 for me. I've looked at hundreds of buildings in this market. I can't think of another single completed tower anywhere in Metro Vancouver, possibly anywhere in Canada, where this is the case. A building full of people trying to sell, willing to take enormous losses, and still finding zero buyers. That tells you something profound about where demand has gone for ultra luxury product in this city. And it also tells you something about why the developer is struggling on closings. Because if the people who already own units can't sell them, there's no active resale market, why would anybody want to complete on a new unit? Why would you take on a $3 or $5 million liability when you can see right in front of you that the building has no liquidity? This is a trap in the butterfly, and that's what we're seeing right now. And it's really hard to see a clean way out of it. The other luxury tower mentioned in the text message from Lureni by Kengo, Kuma. Another luxury building in Vancouver. This one has a slightly different story, but it's no less stark. Where the butterfly has essentially zero resale activity, Lureni has some recent sales. A couple of units have transacted. And I want to walk you through what those sales have actually looked like, because I think this puts a human face on what these numbers actually mean. Now, I don't want to deliberately go over specific unit numbers because these are real people who paid a lot of money for these homes and they also lost a lot of money on them. And I don't think it's right to put them on blast publicly. But the price data is public record, and I think it's important to share with you. Example 1, a 1-bedroom condo, 655 square feet. Not a tiny shoebox, a real 1-bedroom with proper square footage. And of course, being a Lureni, it's an incredibly luxurious space. Exceptional finishes, world-class amenities, views, everything, it's got it all. This unit recently sold for approximately $1 million. Now, $1 million for a 1-bedroom in Vancouver is already a number that makes most people's eyes water. It's painful. Can't even believe I'm saying that. But here's the thing. During the pre-sale, this unit was purchased for $1.85 million. That seller has lost approximately $850,000 on a 1-bedroom apartment. And the worst thing is that $850,000 loss doesn't even tell the full story. Because on top of that loss, you have years of carrying costs, mortgage interest, strata fees, property taxes, insurance, easily tens of thousands of dollars per year. You have real estate commissions on that. You have potential GST implications on that. You have property transfer tax, lawyer fees. When you add it all up, the true economic loss for this transaction is probably $900,000, potentially even over $1 million on a 1-bedroom condo. That's insane, you guys. I can't even believe I'm talking about this right now. I thought $1 million house in Vancouver, you would have actually made it. You know, you're rich. Example number 2 is a 2-bedroom unit, 1,400 square feet, which is genuinely a large 2-bedroom by Vancouver standards, a premium unit in a premium building. This unit recently sold for approximately $3.5 million, but it was purchased during the pre-sale for $5 million. That's a $1.5 million nominal loss. Again, before you factor in carrying costs, commissions, and taxes. The true all-in loss is probably closer to $2 million or beyond. I want you to sit with these numbers for a second. These are not people who made a small mistake or took a small risk that didn't pan out. These are people who made rational decisions based on the market conditions and expert advice available to them at the time. They did what everyone in Vancouver real estate was doing, and they lost life-changing amounts of money. And this is happening in a building where the developer still has unsold units. So the developer is watching their own neighbors sell at these discounts, which makes it even harder to sell their remaining developer-held inventory. Because who's going to pay full asking price when they can see what resale market is doing right next door? And this has created an absolutely vicious cycle, and it's playing out in real time right in front of us. Next up, let's talk about Vancouver House, another major Westbank project, and one that's been in the news recently for a completely different reason. A report from the City of Vancouver Auditors General has been leaked, and it raises some very serious questions about how the land deal for Vancouver House is structured and what the city has actually got out of it. Let me walk through 2 things that stood out the most to me. The first issue is with city contributions. When Vancouver House was approved, the deal included a commitment from Westbank to provide the city with certain public benefits. This is fairly standard in any development. According to the Auditor General's report, those contributions were supposed to be around $26 million. What the city actually received was closer to $10 million. $4 million in direct cash and $6 million from the physical improvements to the surrounding area. So right away, you're looking at a gap of roughly $16 million between what was promised and what was delivered. But it gets worse, because according to the project, even the $6 million in improvements wasn't fully delivered as promised. There was supposed to be a public elevator connecting development to the Granville Bridge. The elevator is not even open to the public. There was also supposed to be a public washroom. The only washroom accessible to the public is inside a grocery store inside of the building. These were commitments made as a part of the approval process with the city. And according to the Auditor General, they weren't kept. The second issue brought up is the land price. And this one's really striking. The city of Vancouver sold the land in Vancouver House for approximately $32 million, plus the promised contributions for a total of roughly $60 million in the expected value to the city. Now, immediately after the sale completed, the same land was assessed at $100 million. And Westbank went and got a $100 million mortgage on that land right away. So what happened here? The city sold land worth $100 million for only $32 million. And the developer immediately turned around and borrowed $100 million against it. The Auditor General clearly flagged this. And I think most reasonable people would look at that and have questions. Huge questions. How is the land valued at $32 million when it was independently assessed at $100 million the moment it closed? Who is involved with this valuation process? And how does the city, perpetually short on funds for affordable housing, end up losing, $68 million? That is a huge gap on a single piece of land. I'm not saying anything illegal happened. That's not for me to determine or speculate, but these are exactly the kind of questions that a functioning audit process is supposed to ask. And I'm glad that the Auditor General is asking them. That's all for today. I'll see you on the next one.